And 10 years ago, in June of 2013, Apple unveiled iOS 7 to the world, which is a major redesign of iOS that is considered one of the most important updates to this day. Because compared to the previous skeuomorphic iOS 6, you can tell the two look very different. But for reasons that I went more in depth into another video on this, which I'll have a link down below in the description. But basically, iOS 6 introduced Apple Maps. And because Apple Maps was so buggy at launch, Apple went out and did an apology letter for it, but because Scott Forstall, the engineer of iOS that was also responsible for Apple Maps, did not sign the apology letter, he was fired. He was fired because he thought that they would just fix it in future updates, which is honestly kind of sad considering what iOS later becomes. Even though skeuomorphic iOS does look more fun, Johnny Ive, who was the lead designer of Apple's hardware at the time, decided to also take over the software, and he gave it iOS a much more cleaner look, which I honestly do think iOS 7 does look more clean and modern personally compared to iOS 6, but I also do love the funness of iOS 6. So yeah, but iOS 7 didn't really introduce that many new features to start out with. Is more or less just a reskin of iOS 6. For example, even in the Notes app, all the skeuomorphism was gone. This was some hints of an unreleased video back in September when I tried to live with iOS 6 for a week. But yeah, back on top, as you can tell, the skeuomorphic UI of iOS 6 was primarily gone, but it was still semi-skeuomorphic in iOS 7, as you can tell. Like, it still had that nice felt-like feel, which is unfortunately gone in iOS today. As even though iOS may not have a major redesign, iOS 17 and 11 and 10 but all had major redesigns, so iOS still has changed a lot since 7. I think the 7-like design is way more cleaner than newer iOS versions, as now it tries to be this weird skeuomorphic flat hybrid, which I'm not the most fond of that design. I think this design looks way cleaner. But what can I say? iOS 7 did introduce the control center compared to the multitasking bar, which had some built-in controls. The control center was way easier to use, and you could also, if your iPhone's iDevice supported Siri, you could also change brightness controls like brightness and volume with Siri. But I can't demo that now because Siri does not work, only works on iOS 9 and higher now. But iOS 7 also introduced the app switcher, where you can close out apps. I personally like both app switcher designs, or multitasking bar. I personally like both the multitasking bar and the app switcher. And I do really love this old app switcher design. But again, that was just a new feature. But iOS 7, I certainly think, was the peak of the notification set. Had one of the best notification center designs of all time. Because look at this, like, it shows some cool transparency, which you could get on which a lot of phones did have. But look at this, like, look at how cool and look at how cool this notification center looks like. Come on. Even the control center is transparent, which I don't think the iPhone 4, which is the oldest iPhone to get iOS 7 had. But you also got AirDrop with iOS 7, which is only on the iPhone 5, iPod Touch 5, and iPad Mini 1 or or later, which is a bit weird since the iPhone 4S and the iPad 2 didn't get it because they could totally run AirDrop. But iOS 7 also introduced the flashlight toggle, which previously the only way to enable the flash on iOS 6 was just simply to go into the camera app and turn on the flash and then take a photo. Get a sample of the flash. Like, it wasn't as seamless. So that was one really nice feature that iOS 7 brought. But now it's enough about iOS 7, the changes that iOS 7 brought. Now let's talk about the changes that iOS 7 did along the way. As iOS 7.0.x versus 7.1.x are very different iOS versions. Look at this, like, okay, the control center isn't very different, but one very unique feature is that in iOS 7.1.2, the slide to power off, and iOS 7.1.x, the slide to power off UI is just like on iOS today. Like, it's not much different except for the font, of course. On iOS 7, you had the .0.x, you had this really cool design for slide to power off, which it was even took up the whole bar on iOS 7 beta 1, but I'm not able to show that. Another unique feature is that in the phone app, which, hang on, I gotta make sure it's not. Yeah, see, like the phone app UI even changed a little bit because there was the call button changed. So there's minor differences. So there are minor differences like that in iOS 7 throughout its year revisions. But how is it using iOS 7 today? Well, you can jailbreak iOS 7.1.x as I have done right here, and I have tutorials on. But on iOS 7.0.x, I've never gotten a jailbreak to work because Evasion 7 no longer works. So that's very unfortunate. But iOS 7, interestingly enough, still does let you download apps without a jailbreak, at least the last I checked. And if you're already logged into Instagram, yes, you can get Instagram on iOS 7 still. Which, again, I don't think, if you haven't logged in yet, I don't think if you haven't logged in yet, I don't think Instagram doesn't work anymore. That's pretty cool. And Twitter does not work on iOS 7, but even the iMovie app, as you can tell, is a bit different on iOS 7, but most notably, look at the GarageBand icon. Like, seriously. That's skeuomorphic in iOS 7. And look at this. Like, look how skeuomorphic. Like, this still looks like an iOS 6 app. Oh man, I remember this classic drums UI as my dad used to have GarageBand on his phone, iPhone 4S, so I remember this UI very well. But look, like this is just but that's just a small hint of skeuomorphism in iOS 7, similar to how macOS Yosemite still had the skeuomorphic beach ball, which is the first skeuomorphic macOS, but I guess overall that is a wrap of my iOS 7 showcase in 2023. As always, thank you all for watching this video. And by the way, this video was a shout out done by, I don't remember, was requested by a YouTube user who I'll put his comment up on the screen right now. And big thanks to that person for suggesting that I do a retrospective on this. And as always, I'm the iTunes fanboy. Thanks for watching this video and peace out.